My name is Chris Holland, and I'm the Executive Director here, and we are so honored today to have Reverend Hathaway with us to help celebrate the Civil Rights Movement over Martin Luther King weekend. We were blessed last year with having the Union Baptist Choir perform on our round table, and it was absolutely beautiful. And you might ask yourselves, well, why is Union Baptist partnering with the B&O, continuing to partner? And it's because we have a very strong, interconnected history. One that Reverend Hathaway is going to share, a key part of that story today about railroad segregation. And I think, as many of you know, the history of African Americans in the railroads is complex. I mean, for example, we are standing right in front of a Jim Crow era segregation car, and I would encourage you to go in and look inside. I would also encourage you to take our Slavery to Civil Rights tour, which will be this afternoon at 3. It's, a little bit of marketing there, but it's really more of substance because it takes you through the time of the fact that most railroads, and we think the B&O as well, we don't have full documentation on it, but were built using slave labor. And we go from, and actually railroads at one point in time were the largest leaseholders of slaves. They weren't, they didn't own them, but they did lease slaves. So it's a part of history that a lot of people are not aware of. But then the tour takes you all the way through, the Civil War, all the way then to the ending of the tour is with an opportunity to see the Dreamland Pullman car, the Dreamland Sleeper, which is a phenomenal opportunity to go inside to see the engineering, but you also get an opportunity to see what was the life of the Pullman Porter. And the Pullman Porter Company, at one point, soon after the Civil War, they were the largest employer of African Americans and are credited in some parts of actually providing a pathway to the middle class. So it's a very complex history, and it's one that we want to tell more of, and that's why we like doing programs such as this and sharing these stories so that we understand the full cultural, social, and economic impacts of the railroad. So we're very pleased to have Reverend Hathaway. He was called to Union Baptist Church as assistant pastor in 2004, and he was elevated to the position of pastor in 2007. He is a native Baltimorean, and in fact, he grew up on the same block as the church. He earned a PhD of religion from the North Carolina College of Theology and a Doctor of Ministry degree from the United Theological Seminary. In high school, he and Elijah Cummings were classmates. He, I believe, would call himself this. He is a social justice activist, and he has been instrumental on so many issues here in Baltimore. Most recently, he has been working to help, cross the digital divide. He and his church have been setting up free internet service for people in the community, which is particularly important right now. And they also, Union Baptist Church, he leads one of the nation's premier Head Start programs of anywhere. And he's really a thought leader and visionary for Baltimore. So we value very much our partnership with Union Baptist Church. And after his talk, we're going to have opportunity for some questions and discussion. And we are, as you can see, recording it for people that could not come today so we can post it online. So without further ado, Reverend Hathaway and Union pastors riding on the B&O.
I think we are enough distance apart that I can't take this mask off. I want to thank you. I tell you, it's amazing feeling when people introduce you. You kind of then look around and say, well, where's that person? And in a sense, I've been uniquely blessed here as a native son of Baltimore City, and really growing up right in this community in the shadow of this museum and the wonderful work of B&O Railroad. I just want to talk to you about just a story, invite you into a story that I entitled Union Pastors Riding on the B&O Railroad. I am the 10th pastor in the 169th year history of Union Baptist Church. Union Baptist Church there that's located in the 1200 block of Driggle Avenue is one of the oldest continuing African American churches founded by African Americans back in 1852. It's interesting, when I think about that I was actually born in the block of the church that I now serve. So I was born at 1211 Driggle Avenue. The church that I serve is at 1219 Driggle Avenue. So can you imagine that you grow up inside of a community where everybody that you pastor know you better than you know yourself? Now, you know, I got to walk with God because they know all my secrets as well as they know all of my stories. And so it's been an amazing experience there, working there. It's a historic community. If you've never been to the Upton community in Baltimore, it is the largest historic African American district in America. It extends over from Mount Royal, goes all the way over, literally almost over to Fulton. North Avenue goes down to Martin Luther King. It's a very rich history and has played a vital role, and the people that live there has played a vital role in the life and legacy of our community. Union Baptist Church, can you imagine this? It was created in 1852, but in 1865 it founded what we now know as Bowie State University. So it housed Bowie State University. It conducted education there. It trained persons because it understood the connection between literacy and education and freedom. So the oldest historic black college and university in Baltimore City finds its genesis right there in Union Baptist Church. I got to also admit, I got to give credit to Sharp Street United Memorial Church. They founded Morgan State University. They did that 2 years later. That was in 1867. So here you have, right within the community of Upton, churches that have spawned educations and institutions of higher learning. Understanding that within the African American community, learning, academic achievement, education is a value. We see that as a building block for freedom. I was born in Providence Hospital. Providence Hospital was a African American hospital. Then they used the term Negro. There it was located in the 1400 block of Division Street. So can you imagine that much of my life's trajectory was the 1200 block of Drew Hill Avenue, Division Street, which is just one block west of North Avenue, and then that's the 1400 block is where I was born, 1200 block where I live, and the 1200 block is a church where I serve. It is amazing that for all of God's grand universe, He basically had me just going around a 4th block area. I look back, God is amazing with that. One of the things that was always interesting about that community of Upton was that they would always have what was known as the Easter Parade. I don't know if any of you have had that experience in your life when you would dress up and there would be a big parade in your community and you would march and parade. Well, they used to do that there on Pennsylvania Avenue. Pennsylvania Avenue is a historic place. It was the place of the Royal Theater, the place that was a part of what they call the Chitlin Circuit. So all of the entertainers, all of those musicians always frequent Pennsylvania Avenue. But then on Easter, they'll bring all the community together, dress us up, and they'll have this parade where we will parade in our Sunday finest there on Pennsylvania Avenue. It was trying to just give you a glimpse of a very rich community that I was able to grow up in. If you think about a block, the 12th block of Drew Hill Avenue, I'm growing up. Many of you might remember during that time, I was born in the 50s, I was born in 1951. So this is a long trajectory of time. I'm thankful that God has allowed me the experience of longevity because it gives me ability of reflection. But I remember that the persons would come and they would bring coal and they would open up your basement door and pour coal down into your basement, and you'll hear the noise of all that, and then you got to go down there and shovel it in and make sure you push it into the furnace. I remember when the milkman would come and put milk bottles right on your steps, and you'll put the empty milk bottles out and you put the new milk bottles there. I remember when the Iceman would come and he'd have those big calipers and he'll bring a block of ice. This was the community that I grew up in. And then in the 1300 block of Drew Hill Avenue was the home of Clarence and Juanita Mitchell. Clarence and Juanita Mitchell were just outstanding civil rights figures in our community. They had a series of sons. They had 5 sons. Their youngest son, who just passed last week, George, and I were peers, and we were playmates. But then they had Kiefer Mitchell, who was a doctor. They had Clarence C3, who was a state senator. They had C4, who was a state senator. They had Michael Bowen Mitchell, who was a state senator. It was a very active and socially active community and block. And that's where I grew up. Just a little footnote about the Mitchells was that they also had their law office right there in the 1200 block of Drew Hill Avenue, at 1239 Drew Hill Avenue. And that was where Thurgood Marshall, when he was working on the second Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1955, that's where he did the work, right there, 1239 Drew Hill Avenue. So I'm trying to give you a glimpse of a block that is a snapshot of the African American community here. In her later days, Miss Juanita Mitchell was confined to a wheelchair. And so she basically needed to have a caregiver there in her home. And if I were to tell you the name of her caregiver, I think everybody here would be astounded. Her caregiver, who was a health professional, was Rosa Parks. So Rosa Parks would be right there in our community and neighborhood, taking care of Juanita Mitchell. I have pictures of Mary McLeod Bethune standing there on the steps there. I have pictures of Eleanor Roosevelt right there in that community. This was the community that I grew up in, and this is the community that I dearly love, and this is the community that nurtured me. Right across the street was the home of E.E. Cummings. E.E. Cummings was the first African-American city council member right there in the block. Right across from me was the office of the NAACP, known as the Freedom House, right there. Right on the corner where I lived, there was a big triangle square picture window. And in that triangle square picture window was a grand piano, and that was the Pendy Hughes Piano Company. So as you walk by every day, you look at a grand piano right there. So obviously, you had to tickle the keys. You had to learn how to play, because one of the personalities of our city was U.B. Blake, who was an amazing piano player himself. So this is just a glimpse of where I grew up in. And I grew up at a time when Union Baptist Church is and has been an activist church. So I'm about your size, Brother Bullock, of your youngest son. And they decided that they were going to picket Gold Seeker. And Gold Seeker was a real estate owner in Baltimore who modeled what was called land installment contracts. Land installment contracts were those contracts that a person of color would think that they were owning their home, but would realize it was nothing but a long-term rental situation. And so the activists in our community, Reverend Dobson and others, decided to picket Gold Seeker. And what they would do is that they would take a young child like his son, Councilman Bullock's son, and I was that young child, give you a sign and say, hey, come on, we want you to just walk with us to the other side. I didn't realize that that's what's called a warm body. And so I began my activist career as a warm body. And then they had the grand idea to desegregate Gwinnett Park. That was in 1963. Gwinnett Park there, the desegregation occurred really during June and July. You know the Great March on Washington, that occurred in August of 1963. So here I am now, I'm just about 12 years old, and they say, hey, we're going to desegregate the park. They go there, all this activism, all this action. And to my grandest memory, I'll never forget the time when I was able to go into Gwinnett Park, just to do a simple thing like ride a merry-go-round, a simple thing like ride a Ferris wheel, a simple thing like buy some cotton candy. And to this day, I'm so proud that merry-go-round that I rode there in 1963 is now on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. as a testimony to the activism of the leaders here in Baltimore City. So that children, even to this day, can still ride that same merry-go-round that I rode back there in 63 as a child. Baltimore is a grand city. Baltimore has a rich history. And I was just so proud to be a part of that, to have it as a lived experience. One of the other parts of the experiences that I was able to share is that I was always a part of a cohort that was integrating schools. Growing up in Upton, my family moved to West Baltimore, and the first school that we attended was Betsy Ross Elementary School. And here we were, African American students, integrating the 2500 block of Holland Street, now integrating Betsy Ross, number 60 school. And I'm telling you, that was a difficult time. It was not easy there because we were not readily accepted into that school. So much so that the school system in record time built our own Negro school right where we live. So they didn't have to go across Frederick Avenue anymore. They built in record time a school for us to attend, and we attended that school. And then I was a part of a cohort that then went and integrated Winds Falls Park Junior High School. And that's where my dear esteemed friend Elijah Cummings became my seatmate from 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade. And then we went on to Baltimore City College to integrate and be a part of that cohort that was integrating Baltimore City College. So 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, this was my dear friend, and we had that opportunity to share and tabernacle together all throughout his life. One of the things about Baltimore City was that in growing up, we had streetcars. I don't know if any of you know what a streetcar is, but a streetcar, thank you. Okay, I got some folks, y'all knew about those streetcars. A streetcar was a trolley car that had train tracks that would go all throughout the city. You take a dime and you get on the trolley car, you could ride literally everywhere. We had an amazing transportation system. And that trolley car was my first really experience with an electric train. And of course, I loved it. So much so that when Christmas came, I told my parents I needed an electric train set. And I got a little electric train set and got a little plywood board and actually constructed my own yard where I had a train yard and my trains would go around. Can you imagine the mind of a child that looks up and sees something so simple as a mechanized engine, which is a railroad car, and then it becomes something that they want, something that they want to participate in, something that they want to be a part of. And really, that germinated for me that kind of experience. I remember when I was in the Boy Scouts, we caught a train and went to Harper's Ferry. That train ride to Harper's Ferry was so that we could see the place where John Brown had his famous raid. And that was one of my early experiences in getting in a rail car and riding on a train to Harper's Ferry. I learned a lot there because I was able to understand the importance and significance at that time of the B&O Railroad and the C&O Railroad. The B&O Railroad and the C&O Railroad really connected Cumberland and Baltimore, Maryland. A lot of business, a lot of industry. Think about insurance companies like USF&G and all of those. They emerged to provide this big railroad system, created commerce here. And I was able to catch an early glimpse of it. So much so that after I graduated from Baltimore City College and then went to Baltimore Community College, I had the opportunity because I began to be one of those early persons who worked on computers. I was on that first generation computers where the computer thing was about as big as a refrigerator, 4 times. And you would, basically behind it, you would take the wiring, and the wiring, you would place it into certain portals inside of the equipment, and that's what programmed the equipment. I was a part of that, and I was impressed. This tells you about the quality of community college education, because that community college education equipped me with the capacity, so much so that at 19 I was hired by the B&O Railroad to be a computer operator. And my station that I worked in was Camden Station. Camden Station that you now know with the Memorial Stadium there, with the Oriole Park. That Camden Station was the place where that was the computer site for the operation for the railroad. And I had the responsibility for the 4 to 12 shift. Now, if anybody that's ever worked shift work, you know that the 4 to 12 shift is not the shift of first choice. And so I had to be on that shift 4 to 12. And here's the responsibility that I had. In each yard along the Baltimore terminal, there would be a yard clerk. And that yard clerk would stand there really with a clipboard and would watch each train as it went by. If you look at a train, it'll have a series of 3 letters that tells the company that it's a part of, CSX, PEN, or whatever that company might be. And then it would have a series of numbers, and mostly 4 numbers at that time that it will have. the yard clerk would have to sit there as the train came in past the station, would have to record every train, every car that passed them. He would take that information and then communicate that information to myself at the computer operation. And I would then transfer that information that he communicated to me on a clipboard. And I would then have to use a punch card. You might remember those IBM cards. I had to create a punch card for every car that was on a train that came into the system. I would then take that punch card, run that punch card through a big machine that had a big paper tape, and that would create the record of the cars as they came into the system. Just think about that. I'm just 19 years old, having that kind of responsibility. I look back at it and just thought, that's what America's about. It's not having so long a gestation period that it doesn't take talent and use it when it's ready and able. And so I had that experience there as a computer operator, just an amazing experience. It caused my love for trains that I have even to this day. I went from being a computer operator to being a rate clerk. And there as a rate clerk, I moved from Camden Station to the headquarters of the B&O Railroad. That's right there on the corner of Charles Street and Baltimore Street. Charles Street and Baltimore Street, there I think it's a hotel now, but it is one of the most opulent buildings in the city of Baltimore. Marble, gold inlaid, reflecting the wealth of the railroad system of that day. I worked there as a rate clerk, and what a rate clerk does is that persons want to move a commodity on a train. As they move that commodity on a train, they have to get a price for what would that commodity be. So they call a rate clerk. The rate clerk looks at the weight, looks at the distance, looks at the commodity, and then gives that person a pricing for what that would be. And they would then create a contract that would allow that person to move their cargo across the train. That experience, I think, hooked me. I had my dream job. I was working for the railroad. This was prior to the merger between C&O and B&O. During the time that I did, they merged. And when they merged, they became what's called the Chelsea system, which I believe that name survives even to this day. I didn't understand anything about national politics. I didn't understand anything about it. I'm just working a job, thankful that I have a job, thankful that I have a career. But in 1970, what was passed was the Clean Air Act. Wait a minute, what would the Clean Air Act have to do with an Al Hathaway as a rate clerk at the B&O Railroad? Well, what at that time President Nixon did was that he called for a coal embargo because the Clean Air Act dealt with the quality of the air quality that we now breathe and the quality of ensuring that there aren't pollutants released into the air. And so what happened was they then began to cease the transport of coal. And as you can imagine, that was a significant commodity that made up the balance sheet of the B&O Railroad. And so what do they do when your income is lessened? You lay off people. I said, oh my, Nixon has got me laid off from my dream job simply because he was seeking to enforce the Clean Air Act of 1970. That really was my experience with the trains and the experiences that allowed me as I began to mature. And knowing what the train would do, I wanted the experience of an international travel. And so my first experience in international travel was getting on the Montreal. The Montreal is a train that runs from Penn Station, it really starts to get further. But I would get on it at Penn Station, and it was an overnight ride to Montreal, Canada. Man, can you imagine? Little guy from Baltimore City is now international travel because I was able to cross over the Canadian border. And Montreal became significant for me because Sugar Ray Leonard was there in the Olympics. And there he fought the Olympics, I believe it was 1976, that brought to our attention, hey, there's a city called Montreal. and I would get on the train and travel to Montreal. It was an amazing place. I would go there because, and then as a part of going to Montreal, what I did, knowing the history of the train, I would get the ticket for the sleeping car. Because I had now had the freedom to go to the sleeping car, and I would sleep on the sleeping car. Now I'm gonna tell you something. The sleeping car, back at that time, I believe the height of people was maybe around about 5'6". So they really designed it for people of that age, not knowing that through health and all the other good things, and nutrition and whatnot, we grew taller. So of course, inevitably, anybody that slept in the sleeping car, if you were taller than 5'6", you had to like crunch up. But there I would get on that car, go to Montreal, and that was my early travel. So much so that when I got married, I took my wife to Montreal. I wanted her to have that same experience. So much so that 20 years later, when we celebrated our 20th anniversary, I took her back to Montreal again. Starting all from a rail car, starting all from a dream. So as the 10th pastor of Union Baptist Church, I was the beneficiary of the work of the 5th pastor of Union Baptist Church. We did not experience that same kind of freedom, where you could just get on a train, be served by anyone, could go into the sleeping car if you so choose, could go to first class accommodations if you so choose, and travel throughout America. I think about that because I think about that Reverend Dr. Harvey Johnson, who served Union Baptist Church. Check this out. From 1872 to 1923. 50 years. 50 years this man served this church with the kind of distinction that in his day, he was thought of just like Martin Luther King is thought of in our day. He was the Baptist leader in America, known by everyone. He had letters. I read letters between him and W.B. Du Bois, read letters between him and Frederick Douglass, read letters between him and Booker T. Washington, letters between him and Mary McLeod Bethune. He was the leader known throughout the country, right here in Baltimore City, and he served his church well. When he came in 1872, round about 1883, 1884, there were four sisters, who came to him because they were riding the steam line from Hampton, Virginia, Norfolk, Virginia to Baltimore. They had purchased a first-class ticket, but when they went to present their first-class ticket for first-class accommodations, the persons on the SUE, S-U-E, steam line told them, you can't sleep in first-class accommodations because of the color of your skin. You've got to sleep below with the cap. They were incensed. That wasn't the sermons that Dr. Johnson had preached. They were free. And so they refused to go down below with the cap. And they stayed there on the berth with the out in the open. And they came back and they told Dr. Johnson that, wait a minute, Dr. Johnson, wait a minute, you purchased a first-class ticket and they didn't give you first-class accommodations? He said, no, they didn't. So Dr. Johnson got a lawyer, his name was Archibald Sterling. And in 1884, they sued the Sioux steamship line. And that case went from local court all the way to federal court. And they won that case in the federal court. The case is the first case that determined that people who were Negro were not chattel in interstate commerce. Very important decision, because they had on the books already, Plessens versus Ferguson. They had on the books that the fact that persons who were of Negro origin and Negro birth did not have rights that whites had to respect. So they won this case, a pivotal case there in 1884, the Sioux steamship case. And then what he discovered was that, wait a minute, maybe the way for us to advance our freedoms is through the use of legal redress. You had others, John Brown, Gabriel Preston, they thought you did it through violence. He said, no, we'll do it through legal redress. And he created what is now known as test case strategy. Tuskegee strategy is that legal tool through which all of our freedoms have been gained. If you were of different racial origin, they would call up a rental office and they'll send you to the rental office, and if you were black or you were white or you were Asian, and then they would say who got the rental property. And they would go back and say, hey, if you black, no, we don't have any more. But hey, you white, hey, we've got plenty. And then they would sue. So the Housing Act later of 1965 and all of those things, 1968, all of those things happened because of Harvey Johnson understood way back when, in 1884, that you could use the law for redress. He believed the words. These truths that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with rights of liberty, happiness, and pursuit. He believed that. And in 1885, he codified that by creating the Mutual United Brotherhood of Liberty. The Mutual United Brotherhood of Liberty was the precursor for what we know as the NAACP, Legal Defense Fund. He created that in 1885, and then they began to sue because he did that in June of 1885. Then in August of 1885, he had the first African American admitted to the Maryland State Bar, Edward J. Warren. So can you imagine, here's the mind of a Baptist preacher sitting there on Drew Hill Avenue who is beginning to address national issues as it relates to the rights of citizens in terms of equal accommodation, fairness, and the use of the Constitution and law. As he gets Edward J. Warren admitted to the bar, now he's got it. He not only has his understanding of the law, but he's got a lawyer that can present the cases. And they began to sue. They sued so that there would be equal pay for teachers, whether you were Negro or white. They sued for that. They sued if you were in communities, if you was in a black community, they would say if you lived on a alley street, started alley. And he said, no, wait a minute, no, black folks don't live on no alleys. We live on streets, and sued so that they could change the law so that they're in the city now, you don't have any alley streets that were formerly alleys are now called streets. He sued because he believed and wanted them to understand that people who were of African origin had the same rights of anyone in America. And then that's 1885 now. He's suing. I mean, he's suing so much. I mean, he's just weighing them out. One of his partners now, he's done expanded the legal area so that Meacham wants to move, wants to move on McCullough. Drew Hill Avenue, McCullough, then you have Bolton Hill. He wanted to move on McCullough, and what happened was the city council created a law. That was like 1911, created a law that said, hey, they had basically racial covenants. And they sued and were able to get those things. The reason why I tell that story, I tell the story of my experiences as a 10th pastor. And I want to begin to give you a glimpse of Harvey Johnson as the 5th pastor, because here's Harvey Johnson sitting on a rail car there in 1906, sitting on a rail car. And they're going to tell Reverend Dr. Harvey Johnson that you can't sit in this area because it's for whites only. Can you imagine? They didn't know who they were talking to. You're talking to Reverend Dr. Harvey Johnson. And you're going to say to me that you're going to discriminate because of my color on a rail car. They didn't know who they were talking to. This is Reverend Dr. Harvey Johnson, who looked at education in terms of public education and had the Baltimore City Council admit and create Douglas High School and build a school for people of color right there in this community. So much so that he made the mayor, who said he didn't want to fund it, made the mayor come and present the diplomas for the first graduating class. This is Harvey Johnson. You're telling Dr. Harvey Johnson that you can't ride in a car and I'm free? So what do you imagine that Dr. Harvey Johnson would do there in 1906? Now wait a minute, that's 1906. I gotta go back 1 year before. In 1905, he builds the finest church in America there on Drew Hill Avenue. He has John Lafarge Windows, who was contemporary of Louis Tiffany. one of the finest collection of John Lafarge windows anywhere in America. He builds the finest facility in 1905, and now in 1906, you're gonna say to Dr. Harvey Johnson, you can't ride on that section of a train because you are a Negro. Well, Dr. Harvey Johnson has already got a team of lawyers. He sued. And one of the interesting things that I learned from Dr. Harvey Johnson was that even though he might have felt a personal injustice, he always looked at it from the perspective of public policy. He didn't internalize it as a personal affront. And I'm going to be mad, I'm going to be incensed. You don't know who I am, so therefore I'm going to just attack you. No, he reasoned that the change that needed to have was in your policies and in your structures. So he understood early on that you had to attack structural racism at its core. And he did it from the perspective of legal redress. And so they won that case. They took that case, they won that case. They went up to Maryland State Court and they then determined that they would not have desegregated cars, railroad cars. And it was amazing because I had the ability back to befriend a gentleman. His name was Troy Braley. Troy Braley was a senator. Troy Braley was a confidant and a personal friend of A. Philip Randolph. A. Philip Randolph headed the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, and they would tell me these stories. So these stories were rich. So as I come here today, I just wanted to give you an example of how the B&O Railroad and people in America, people in Baltimore City have shared experiences. But out of those shared experiences, even with the bumps and the trails and the curves, we've come out of it, I think, as a better institution. I think we've come out of it as better people. I want to close with this footnote. Dr. Harvey Johnson then announced about 1910, he had done all of this fighting, done all of this work, done all of this struggle, done all of these constructs. He reasoned and said, maybe America really doesn't want people of African ancestry just to live here. So I tell you what, this is what we do. If you really don't want us, America, why don't we just buy the state of Texas and we all go there? We're just all of the African Americans, all of the Negroes, we just go there and we'll govern ourselves. And he put forth a proposal of the Articles of Incorporation I have in my files. He put forth a proposal for Negroes to buy the state of Texas. It was called the Texas Purchase Movement. Can you imagine this brilliant man who understands legal constructs to the point would put forth a plan to buy the state of Maryland, the state of Texas? And I look back and I close just with this one thought, that in that case he was not successful, unfortunately. Because if he had been successful, that was over 100 years ago. If he had been successful, I'd be standing here not only as the 10th pastor of Union Baptist Church, I'd be standing here also as the governor of Texas. I'll end with that.
I know what you said, what you did, but how were you treated when you worked on the B&O? Was it a good experience, not good experience?
It was amazing. When I think about it, I think I was really blessed to have been placed on the 4 to 12 shift because I didn't have to really interact with other coworkers. I was basically there by myself, so my experience was a good experience. Even though I know that persons during that same time, if they were in the yards or actually worked on this brakeman or whatnot, they had challenging experiences, but my experiences were very good. I went from there and I went to the corporate office, and there they treated me with respect as I worked there in the rate clerk office. So my experience was very good. I try to contrast that, my experience that was good as a 10th pastor with the experience of Dr. Harvey Johnson that was not so good. So there was growth in those years.
And did you, the only other thing I'll just ask you before we go further is, did you have any family members that worked for the B&O? Because I know, Thurgood Marshall, as many of you know, worked for the B&O because his uncle and father were lifelong employees. The B&O has a history, the railroads have a history of generation after generation. And I just wondered, you said it was because you came out of a community college, but was there any family connection to the B&O?
No family, but my father, who came from our hometown of Edenton, North Carolina, worked at the Bethlehem Steel. So when you think about Bethlehem Steel during that heyday, that was the creator of the black middle class wealth in the Baltimore area. And much of the rail system, the coal and the steel that was there were commodities that were shipped on the B&O Railroad.
Interesting. And now opening up, yes, you've been very patient.
First of all, good afternoon, Reverend Dr. Hathaway. You're a wonderful storyteller. I too, born and raised in Baltimore, born in 1950, and all those experiences you talk about through places and things, of course, that's my growing up background. Wonderful. But I missed one thing because I too used to go to the park out there that they closed after a while. Did not know they had put the carousel someplace in D.C. Now I do a lot of museum, traveling and so forth. So tell me again, so when I go back over to D.C. after the COV, I guess, I can find that, I used to like the paddle boat. I did get on the carousel, but I like the paddle boat. But I'd like to see that original one.
Yeah, right. The National Mall, almost in equal distance. The National Mall in Washington, D.C. Almost equal distance from the Capitol to the National African American Museum. You'll find right there now the carousel that was the merry-go-round. And it has a whole plaque there that talks about that, when up desegregation, and it's open to the public, meaning at that time, a child could now still ride it, it's still operative. And I took my children there so that they could see it.
Just one other question. So I have been to the National Mall. So you would park in the National Mall and then look for that?
Yes.
That's right in there.
Yes, you can't miss it if you're walking along the mall. It sits almost right in the center of that National Mall.
Okay, thank you for the history.
Yeah, that's over near the Smithsonian.
That's correct. That's correct.
But there's also a Twin Oak carousel up in Hershey Park that identifies.
Oh my! Now you got me there. I didn't know that.
And it's I went up.
Is
there.
it a replica?
No, it's the original carousel.
Okay.
From Twin Oak Park, but it got torn down from there. They moved into Hershey.
All right.
So it's still over there.
Oh, great.
So you might want to consider
Okay.
that.
Oh, great. Thank you.
But also, the building may be gone, the original headquarters, but they still have that patisserie.
Yes, they do.
Yes, they do.
Yes, they do. That's right there at Baltimore and Charles. Please, if you get a chance, when COVID eases up, you have to see that amazing building.
It is gorgeous.
So,
Yes.
I do want to ask a question. So both are claiming to be the original carousel, the one in Hershey Park.
I'm saying the merry-go-round. He's calling it the carousel. The merry-go-round is in National Park. Yeah, the carousel can be there in Hershey Park,
Thank
right?
you. Okay.
Yes.
I'm impressed how you can speak so long with no notes.
Thank you.
Wonderful
You mentioned the
storyteller.
chitlin circuit in the beginning.
Yes.
I think it's a three-part question. Do you know of any places or areas around here where musicians played? And if any names, do you know the names of any musicians who played there? Or any still alive?
Wow. Well, those that played there. Now, you gotta remember when I say the Royal Theater and that chitlin circuit, you're going back to the time of like Red Fox, all the way up to the time before they closed it of Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. James Brown and his famous players played there. You go all the way back. So if you ask the question about any still alive, there would be actually Smokey Robinson would be in that group that remained there, that played there that I was aware of. They would have the Motown Review, and now I'm young enough to be able to go in there. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
They had the Motown Review, and so the Motown Review, you had all of the Motown acts that would come through there. At that time, I had a gentleman who was a member of the Pennsylvania Avenue Church when I was there. He let us in the back door. I supposed to tell him. Excuse me, I'm sorry. But this was a community. So yes, so that's the first part. When I think about your second part of your question is, so there's not really many left there. What would happen is that Pennsylvania Avenue
you didn't have the ability during that day, even if you were one of the musicians, to be able to go eat in places like downtown or in hotels downtown. So there was a whole network in the community of homes that you could stay in, even hotels, we call them rooming houses, that you would stay in. And there were a number of restaurants that they would go to. There was one, Cess was one. There was, just think of the number of restaurants that they would go eat. So, and then they would have, I guess the best way to say this is that in the community you would have blue lights in the basement. Y'all know what blue lights in the basement are? They're house parties. So the musicians would go to house parties that would be sponsored by the sports persons of that era and time. And they would actually go there and keep playing. That'll be the after party. And that would go on through night. And I'm glad I was too young, because I might have got this, I might have gone a different path if I went to those places. I heard there were some wild things that went on there. But that was the community, and that was the community. The first question I missed after trying to deal with your first two.
Some of the places that, or areas that they played in.
Yeah. Many of them are gone, unfortunately. One of the challenges of the historic West Baltimore was that many of the areas that had singular distinction, when they had the urban renewal push in the 70s, after the riots, 70s, and therefore they kind of destroyed many of those places that were of historic significance. They got demolished or gone. Mount Royal Theater destroyed. Cess Restaurant destroyed. You go on and on. One of the things I will say as a footnote, I'm working very hard to restore the PS 103, which is the Henry Highland Garnett School. And that's still on Division Street in the 1300 block, the school that Thurgood Marshall attended. And y'all pray for me, because I think I'm pretty close to putting together the capital to restore that.
That's great. And bringing you...
Follow up. Is there maybe any blues musicians that you remember? Muddy Waters, anybody like that?
Oh, man, you see, I'm old, but not that old. But when you, man, Mickey Fields, what's my sister that was married to the news writer that had the place there at the corner right across from the Lyric Theater? Ethel Ennis, yeah. I mean, those come into my time.
You have certainly they've been making you think back.
Sure
I'm gonna pull you to the present just for a moment. The railroad industry is like a $68 billion industry. And I'm just kind of curious as to what you think the railroad industry could do to, really be more open, more accessible, more in recruiting more African Americans to work in the industry.
That's a good question. My experience when I went to work for the railroad there in '69 going in 1970, my experience was basically triggered also by federal policy. Federal policy basically created the Comprehensive Employment Training Act. That Comprehensive Employment and Training Act, CETA program, basically said to corporations, we'll provide resources for you to begin to hire and give training to persons in your particular industry. And so that happened all throughout the city during that time. A number of my friends went into the fire department as initial ambulance technicians and so forth, and made their careers in the fire department. I was fortunate that I came into the railroad system. And even though they didn't actually use the program, they used the philosophy of the program to hire myself and to hire a number of people who became yard clerks and engineers. So here you had this use by the corporate community of federal programs as an extension and an outreach to bring people into their business model. And so I would say that the B&O Railroad, as I know it, has always been in the Chessie system now. The railroad has always been on the cutting edge now. Let me tell you something else. I must tell you this. I told you the story of myself being in the computer office and the yard clerks calling out the numbers on the trains. Well, here's the innovation that came about during the time I was there. They said, wait a minute, we got yard clerks sitting there watching trains come by, trying to read those numbers and whatnot. So they said, let us test a new way of doing that, a new technology. And the technology that they developed is the SKU system. that you now have that categorize all of your products that you buy. That system was prototyped and tested there at the railroad system. So here was the railroad system looking at how can we create an innovation. And that innovation, which was instead of having people stand there, I could have electronic image hit that SKU that's on the side of the train that would then record what that car was and send that into the office. That happened while I was there. And then now, of course, from modeling that, it's everywhere. You can't buy a product anywhere that doesn't use that SKU system that we have on. So yes.
That's really interesting. I didn't know about the SKU system, but the railroad has brought so much. I mean, workers' compensation, pension plans, all came from the railroad industry that we, enjoy and apply ourselves to today. So that's very interesting. Other questions?
I just wanted to make a comment. You asked what would make African Americans come and join into work, probably, and just as a suggestion, because what brought it back to mind was the CEDAR program. I got a good job at Westinghouse in CEDAR. Well, a lot of those programs are cut out, but the train station itself with B&O could put on some kind of apprentice program for students to really learn about the different jobs in the train business, because I know they make money. I have a girlfriend who retired from the train station up in Chicago. I think that, that would of course bring them, because they just need the training and know that it's open. Maybe they could open up some kind of apprenticeship program to show them the different jobs, what they'd have to do, and so forth. And then when they finish, they get the job.
Right. That's a good suggestion. We are, not that we're talking about us, but we are here, so we'll talk about us for a minute. We are looking at a workforce development program, with one of it being for rail operations that, if you work on our track, if you work with our rail crew, then maybe there's an opportunity to be interviewed by CSX or other companies. So I think that's a very interesting comment, very timely. So thank you. One of the things that we are also doing in partnership with Union Baptist Church is we're doing oral archives where we're recording African American experiences with the B&O, but other railroads as well, either as passengers, as workers, as executives. And there are, back behind the 545 is a video that's playing that just is an excerpt of 3 of those interviews that I think you'll find interesting over time. So I would say if anybody would like to come and give a oral history, please come to the museum and let us know, and we'll record the oral history, because I think a lot of sharing and raising the visibility of these stories is all part of the process. So any other questions? Otherwise, we might let Dr. Hathaway go. This was amazing, Dr. Hathaway. Thank you so much. We very much appreciated you being here. We appreciate the partnership. And one last thing I'll say is in 2027, the 200th anniversary of the B&O Railroad in the country. And Baltimore is the birthplace.